Hello, this is Adrian Sanabria. If you're watching this video, no, it doesn't mean I'm dead. It just means I'm still coming up positive on my COVID tests. I hope you enjoy my talk, Lies and Myths in InfoSec. Here we go. So, why are myths and lies even a thing? InfoSec is challenging enough. We're in a huge growing industry. Sure, it's still a young industry, but growing, lots of money in it. If you have any kind of cybersecurity experience, you're guaranteed a job for life, as far as I can tell. VCs, private equity firms, pouring tons of money into it. And in general, in the last couple decades, we got the budget we asked for. We got the people we asked for. So why would we make up myths and lies? Why would that even be a thing? So that's what we're going to explore today and dive into a little bit deeper. Yep, damages and losses are huge. Why pretend that things are even worse? And one of those things is comfort, which might sound like a weird way to say that, but because a lot of people in this industry are very mission oriented, uh, they tend to latch on to things that fit that narrative, that make them feel proud of doing what they do in cybersecurity and things they would want to share. And so a lot of myths take that form, and then the more nefarious lies maybe prey on that. Another reason, definitely more nefarious, is the fake it till you make it. We live in a culture now where this is entertainment, even. Docudrama series on Theranos and on WeWork have been popping out left and right. Fire Festival, I think there were two docudramas on those that came out at the same time on different streaming networks. And, this is just part of startup culture. That's almost a joke at this point, but it's a very real thing. And a lot of cybersecurity companies are startups. There's over, I think, 3,000 cybersecurity companies I've seen from people who track lists of those things, and a lot of them just want to meet those investor goals. They want to land that next customer, and some of these myths and lies help them to do that. And finally, reason three: proving some of these myths and lies, doing the due diligence on them can be very difficult. And I think nutrition is an interesting industry that we can draw parallels to. Where, sure, I feel great after drinking that shake just after I wake up, but is that because I got two more hours of sleep last night, or is it because I drank the shake? It's really hard to separate the two out, at least for an individual. So, see if you can spot a pattern as we go through the talk here today. This one, I've got Cloud9, Card Systems, and Blue Security. Confirmation bias is probably the better way to say comfort when I was talking about things that fit the narrative before. And it's a very dangerous one because, again, being very mission oriented, if we don't prepare ourselves to do that due diligence, to check on stats, to think twice about the things that people are telling us, we can be very vulnerable and susceptible to confirmation bias and to accepting and repeating those lies and myths. And I think the way that your bias.is puts it here is very useful. Think of your ideas and beliefs as software you're actively trying to find problems with rather than things to be defended. And it's a very unnatural way to do that. We tend to get very defensive, very emotional about our beliefs. And it's just dangerous when myths and lies uh, come to form some of those beliefs. And it's a healthier way of looking at it, I think. Sunk cost fallacy, I think, is behind some of the reason that we see myths turn into lies. So I think starting out, there are a lot of myths that are um, unintentional, that are accidental. Perhaps somebody just says it and it catches on, or somebody misinterprets a stat or a graph. And at some point, The people using this information find out that it's a myth. It's debunked, sometimes directly to them. And at that moment, when they decide whether or not they're going to continue using that bad stat, I think that's where it becomes the myth. The myth becomes lie. And I would like to think that at least in some of these cases, these companies aren't entirely frauds from the beginning, like Theranos, for example. I've dived deeply into that story, and I would like to think at some point that she really did want to innovate, really did want to change the world. But at that point where experts said, no, this can't be done, or at least it can't be done in the near future, I think there's that sunk cost that we've already raised so much investment. I've already promised so many people that we can do this. Some people's egos don't allow them to turn around and go back, or to say, sorry, we can't do it, and return the investors' money. And of course, lies travel much faster than the truth because it takes time to do due diligence and to discover the truth. Varus, Spiky Pickle Restaurants, HB Gary Federal, Distribute.it, DigiNotar. At this point, some folks should definitely start seeing a pattern. And let's take one of these bad stats. Cybercrime costs $2.9 billion per minute. Just let that sit, let that marinate in your brain, especially those of you with statistics or who have taken classes in statistics or have math or science degrees. $2.9 billion per minute. Okay, so sure, maybe they meant to say million and they said billion, but once this tweet is up for half a day, for 24 hours, it can do a lot of damage. It can spread quite a bit. To their credit, they pulled it down, but in a lot of cases, that damage is already done. It's amazing how long myths and lies can live given just a few hours of life before corrected. So, why challenge InfoSec myths and lies? There are a few practical reasons. One of them is credibility for our industry as a whole. Like I mentioned before, we're still a very young industry, so we want to make sure that we maintain this credibility. We've got a lot of attention from media. We're not professionalized. We do manage a lot of people and budget inside of a lot of companies now. So credibility is something to protect. Our reputation is something to protect. Also, some of these myths and lies can misdirect our efforts to solve some problems. Especially if these are being repeated by vendors, by thought leaders, people who are trusted within the industry. A lot of damage can be done in terms of problems not getting solved because resources are pointed in the wrong direction. And finally, I think the truth is worth tracking down because we often get more than just the truth when we do that. We learn more along the way, and it's almost always more interesting than the myth or the lie. Only honest code spaces. You should definitely see where this is going by now. So there's one company behind most of the fake stats in InfoSec. This was something I was fairly shocked to learn, and you might recognize some of their stats. One of them is the infamous trillions of dollars in cybercrime damages every year. 10.5 trillion is now the estimate for 2025. 6 trillion was the estimate in 2021. And if you're like me, I mean, these are staggering numbers. I don't use these numbers at this scale on a regular basis. So I need context. I'm thinking, what's Germany's GDP? Is it less than 6 trillion? Is it more than 6 trillion? How much in ransom payments were paid last year? How much is global fraud every year? And the answer to those questions does kind of help. Germany's GDP is indeed less than 6 trillion, and global fraud numbers are less than 6 trillion. So already I'm thinking, yeah, this does not track. On top of that, one of the biggest issues in our field right now, one of the biggest certainly one of the most um, in the headlines for cybercrime is ransomware. And ransomware never hit $1 billion before it started going back down. Yes, it went down 40% last year. Ransomware payments did. So, if ransomware payments are a fraction of a sixth of a percent of $6 trillion, I have no idea where that the rest of that is coming in. It definitely doesn't make sense. And when you try to research it, there's no data behind it. There's no methodology behind it. There's nothing behind it except this number stated over and over and over again by this company and everyone that listens to them. They're also behind most of the job numbers that you've seen, which also have no data behind them. I don't think these are as quite as egregious. I don't think they're off by orders of magnitude, but I do think they're off. And also, they spend a lot of time touting this old 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a data breach number, which is a crazy stat we'll talk about a little bit later. And there's a tried and true process behind this. Make up a stat, repeat it as much as possible in as many places as possible. There are plenty of media outlets that will let you pay or just let you contribute content to them. That makes whatever you contribute look very official on those domain names. And then once you've gotten it posted in enough places, you can cite it as if it's real research, as if there's some real data behind it. When in fact it's circular, it's recursive, and there actually is no source for that data. There is no methodology. But at first glance, you see a footnote. It looks like it's been properly cited. Until you try and track it down and find it, it goes nowhere. And there's a lot of money to be made in this. This company does very well, and it is featured and quoted everywhere: government, academia, industry experts. Uh, you, I, and you have probably seen these stats uh, at least a couple times this year alone in 2023. And to quote James McCormick, who sold $50 million, 50 million pounds of fake bomb detectors, it does exactly what it's designed to. It makes money. A few more here. My biz homepage, Precedent Communications, Colorado Timberline, Vastamo. So back to the 60% stat. This is one of the most prolific and long-lived fake stats, and actually inspired me to do a bit of research, some of my favorite research, in fact. And again, this is a weird stat. When I first saw this, I thought, you know, 6 months, within 6 months of a breach, like that's a really long time. Like small businesses going under within 6 months of a breach, yeah, they could be going under for any number of reasons. They could be going under because they're the 11th cupcake shop in the neighborhood. They could be going under because they just didn't manage money well. It's just it didn't sit well. So I started to look into it. Started to try and find a source for this data. But where's the evidence behind this data? It didn't exist. So I started researching. I thought, how many companies do actually go under because of a breach, or do any at all? And so after 5 years of doing that research, I found 23 companies. Not 23 companies last year, but 23 companies in the last 20 years. And all time, I can only find 23 companies who have gone under because as a direct effect of a cybersecurity incident or breach. And you can find that data there. It's open to the public. In fact, hundreds of people have helped me curate it over the years and have submitted possible candidates for this data set. And I go through, I investigate each one, and yeah, only 23. So now I've got some data to counter this 60% of small businesses stat. But where did it originally come from? So National Cybersecurity Alliance and Symantec did a joint report, and a quote made it into that report. They published it for only a couple months, as far as I can tell, before taking it down and putting up a retraction, basically saying that there's no data behind that stat. They don't know where it came from, so they're taking it out of the report. And because it sticks around, because it won't go away, every year, or maybe every other year, they publish yet another retraction, basically saying the stat's incorrect, don't use it, we're sorry. In fact, a journalist named Joseph Marks from NextGov tracked down the source and actually interviewed the individual that this quote came from, that this bad stat came from. And he says, I don't know. I heard it from a cybersecurity expert at some point. I don't remember who or when or what any of the details. And so there, we finally tracked down the source. But then how do you kill it? It's still getting used. In fact, the source who originated the fake stat, is still using it as of 2 months ago on his own websites. So he's still pushing this bad stat, even though he knows there's no truth behind it, and has been interviewed to that effect by an investigative journalist. And this has been quoted by the SEC. It led to a bill passing, the NIST, the Small Business Cybersecurity Act. Vendors are using it, thought leaders use it. We see it everywhere still. And now you know what this mystery timeline is. This is the list of 23 companies who have gone out of business due to a cybersecurity incident or breach. And yes, there were a lot in 2019. And yes, I think at least 4 of those were due to ransomware. So that's the most prolific year we've ever seen, is 6 companies, not the 150 plus you would expect to see if that stat were true. Demotivational myths and maxims. So sayings, maxims, whatever you want to call them. There's a few of these that rankle me a bit, and they perhaps help to sell products and services, but I think they need to be replaced. You know, first of all, this one particularly you've probably heard a lot. Attackers only need to get it right once. Defenders have to get it right every time. First off, it's very demotivational. Second of all, it's not true. Maybe this is true for the very first foothold the attacker gets into the defender's environment, but from that point, the math flips, and now the defender um, only needs to catch the attacker once. The attacker has to evade them every single time, and the saying completely flips once they're on the defender's turf. The defender can have deception, traps. There's all kinds of preparation they can do to catch that attacker now. It's not if you get hacked, it's when, is another one here. Um, this is just numerically impossible. There aren't enough cybersecurity or cyber criminals out there to attack every business or every individual. In fact, we've seen many cases where attackers have had access to thousands of networks, and only chose to attack one or two because that's all they had the resources for. So again, this is just incorrect and not useful, unless I guess you're trying to sell products and services. And then humans are the weakest link in security. This is another one that bothers me because humans are humans. And of course, humans are going to do human things. To quote Lisa Plagemeyer here, humans are reliably unreliable. So I would argue the weakest link is anybody designing systems without humans in mind, or systems to be used by humans without humans in mind. Wrap things up here. I have my conclusion cassowary, who I will call Paul. Paul will help me wrap things up here. Have some healthy skepticism. Uh, Take a little time to look up stats. Find data that provides that context, like we did around the $6 trillion number. Do a few sanity checks. A lot of this stuff doesn't take a whole lot of effort to check on. And a lot of these reports, there's no footnotes, there's no methodology listed at the bottom of the report. There are no appendices. Why would you trust it? If there's no scientific rigor, why would you bother? Why would you bother with it? Um, Also, with the maxims, I think it would be great if we could come up with some positive versions of these, some motivational ones rather than demotivational. That would be great to replace these tired stereotypes. And going looking for data is a bit of an art, but it's easier than you'd think. You'd be surprised how much data is out there. Um, Data scientists tend to be very open in sharing. There's a lot of open data sets out there. The Verizon DBIR folks have made their Veris data set available on their GitHub page and are also very accommodating. If you have any questions or want them to do some custom queries or tease out some insights that maybe you have some ideas related to, um, they're great about that stuff. And then failing that, like I did, start to gather the data yourself. Again, a lot of people jumped in and helped me out with that. If you see a bad stat, don't just accuse your marketing team. Don't just tell them to take down that bad stat. Help them out. Some marketing folks, they're not wired to go do due diligence on every single stat. Maybe find something they can replace it with. Help them out a little bit. Don't just don't just jump at them. Um, Also encourage them, or if it's you that's using some of these stats, include important context like the number of re- respondents to a survey, for example. And also, I think statistics should be used to carry the story, to further the story somewhat. A statistic should be the tip of the iceberg of the conversation that you're going to have, not a blunt weapon like that $6 trillion number. Like these maxims that are just made to strike fear and things like that. Uh, and assume that when you use statistics, that it's the beginning of a conversation. Somebody's going to ask you about that statistic, want to dive deeper into it and have a conversation about it. And again, like I've done with my research, if you put together your own data, consider sharing it. Finally, I think it's worth pulling out the truth because the truth is just more interesting. Um, Add more time to your presentations. Well, to your prep time for putting together presentations so that you can check your facts and figures. Or maybe if you have somebody working for you that can do that for you, or maybe go hire somebody on Fiverr that can check your facts and figures. I'm not sure if people on Fiverr do that, but it would be great if they did. And if you spot a bad stat, you nicely tell somebody that they might want to replace that. Thanks for listening to my talk.